Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's online event featuring a knowledgeable subject matter expert speaking about Canada's immigrant determinant system and the experience of the economic newcomer. Before we begin today's event, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHIO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor their culture, them and this land, and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Now, in our last newsletter, we asked N4 members on the level of understanding that they had regarding Canada's immigrant determination system and how an immigrant's status impacts their access to health and social services. Of the 31 responses that we received, close to 58% said that they only knew a few elements of the system or they had no understanding at all. So this will be a great webinar for those on the call today. And many thanks to everybody that responded to our newsletter survey. My name is Andrew Tomeyer. I go by the pronouns he, him, and I'm the education coordinator with N4. I will be hosting and moderating today's webinar presentation. My co-host is Mariah Maddock, who will be monitoring the Q&A box today. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Rupa Banerjee. Dr. Banerjee is Associate Professor of Human Resource Management and Organizational Behavior at Ryerson University in Toronto, Ontario, as well as Canada's Research Chair in the Economic Inclusion of Immigrants. Her primary research interests lie in the employment integration of new immigrants to Canada. She's particularly interested in institutional barriers facing new immigrants in the Canadian labor market. In addition, she is interested in workplace diversity and ethno-racial discrimination, particularly as it applies to second-generation immigrants. Dr. Banerjee's research has appeared in such journals as International Migration Review, Ethnic and Racial Studies, Journal of International Migration and Integration, Journal of Labor Research, and Relations Industrielles, Industrial Relations. Welcome, Rupa. We'll be recording today's session and it will be uploaded to our N4 platform within the next week or so. We'll share this with you as soon as it becomes available. Should there be any technical issues during this webinar, we will inform you with details for an alternate makeup session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our platform features to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to write your questions in the Q&A window. We know that sometimes many of you might have the same question or be interested in a particular response. Today, you have the option to upvote a question. Please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we'll prioritize which questions we pose to the speaker first. Our speaker today has no conflicts of interest to declare. So with that said, I will pass the virtual podium over to Dr. Banerjee. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Hopefully everybody can hear me. We were having a little bit of technical difficulty during our audio check earlier, so hopefully that's all worked itself out. And I apologize in advance if I appear or sound a bit glitchy at times, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me and understand me. So I am going to talk a little bit about the ways in which we select economic immigrants in Canada, and hopefully give you a bit of insight into the system, and through my own research, talk a bit about the experiences of immigrants after they land in Canada, particularly in the workplace, once they're in the labor market looking for work. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully it will work. There we go. As you probably know, Canada has a merit-based immigration system. We are lucky in many ways that Canada's immigration system is lauded as being, an envy of a lot of immigrant receiving countries around the world. And one of the reasons is because it's viewed as welcoming sort of the best and the brightest with skills that we desperately need in our labor market. And so Canada's merit-based immigration system basically prioritizes economic immigrants. So economic immigrants are those that are seen to or viewed to contribute to Canada's GDP and Canada's economic goals, essentially. And so I'm talking a little bit about pre-pandemic numbers here. And so the numbers are being reevaluated. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted our numbers going forward. But in 2019, about 58% of permanent residents entered through the economic category. The other categories within our immigration system, of course, are okay. So my voice is sounding muffled. I don't know.
If you're able to move the phone a little closer to your to yourself, maybe it'll help
Yes, I am using a phone connection today because our internet audio is not working. So if you do see my phone, maybe that'll make it easier. I'm actually going to turn off my camera. Don't know if that would help. Okay, so please do let me know if you're unable to hear me. Hopefully it's gotten a little bit clearer now that I'm holding the phone a little bit closer to my mouth. So the other categories of permanent residents include family-based immigrants, those who are being sponsored by family members who are already in Canada, as well as humanitarian refugee claimants. So within the economic class, the primary goal is to select newcomers based on factors that are being determined to kind of be crucial to Canada's labor market. And so these factors include things like language proficiency, education, work experience, as well as adaptability. And so I'll get into what that refers to a little bit more in a moment. So there's a lot of research in this space to look at whether Canada's skill bias or skill-based immigrant selection policy really has resulted in the kinds of results that we need. And I'm understanding that there's a bit of give me 1 second, I apologize. I have stopped sharing. Andrew, would you like me to actually perhaps not share my slides? I don't know if that would help. Is it better? Is the audio better when my slides are not up?
From my end, I can hear you fairly clearly. So feel free to continue as you can. We apologize for the inconvenience due to just some technical issues on setting up today. There was just we've asked Rupa to present using her phone for audio purposes so that it's a consistent sound. But if you require, please increase the volume on your computer perhaps, and we can work with it from there. So please, Rupa, feel free to continue with the presentation. You're sounding loud and clear to me.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll try again. I'll try one more time.
That's all right.
I will try to speak as loud as I can. Okay, so while we do focus a lot on bringing in the best and the brightest and those with the education and work experience that has been deemed to be what we need in the Canadian labor market, this hasn't always resulted in really, really positive labor market experiences after landing. So post-landing earnings for immigrants has lagged behind other workers for many decades now. So basically, immigrants who have arrived since the 1970s have had trouble catching up to their native-born peers in terms of their ability to find work and their ability to actually find work in their field. And so what this chart sort of shows is the earnings shortfall that newcomers face relative to their counterparts who are Canadian born. So what we actually see is that from the 1980s up until the 2016 census, which is the latest census data that we have, that the earnings shortfall has actually been getting worse over time. So despite the fact that there have been a number of different tweaks to Canada's economic immigration system in an effort to try and bring in the best and the brightest. We do find that median earnings gap has actually been deteriorating over time. And this is an area that's, obviously of great interest to policymakers and advocates and immigrants themselves. So what are the factors that actually contribute to the immigrant disadvantage? Well, we know that there are a number of things that clearly hold immigrants back. And the discounting of foreign credentials is one of the main factors that immigrants find actually prevents them from being able to find the kind of work that they're qualified for. So oftentimes we find that foreign credentials are discounted heavily, particularly for those who are in regulated professions, but even for immigrants who are not from regulated professions, formal educational credentials are discounted heavily. Even more significant than foreign educational credentials is actually the lack of Canadian work experience. So foreign human capital in general, and in particular foreign work experience, is pretty much valued at zero on average by employers in Canada. So particularly with the point system, which I'm going to be describing shortly, a lot of newcomers find that they, had several years of work experience from their home country or from other countries prior to landing in Canada. But once they actually start applying for jobs here, that work experience counts for zero, counts for nothing. And so that lack of Canadian work experience has been really, discussed a lot in the literature as being one of the major factors that is definitely holding back immigrants. Lack of English and French language skills has also been discussed quite a bit, which is ironic in some ways because we actually place a lot of emphasis in Canada's immigration system on having English or French language skills, strong English or French language skills. And despite this, a lot of newcomers and a lot of employers discuss the lack of communication skills as being one of the really big factors that prevents immigrants from finding work in their field. And so this can sort of be interpreted in a number of ways. Whether it's actual lack of language skills or it's the perceived lack of language skills is kind of up for debate because there is some literature out there that has found that oftentimes employers equate accent with lack of language skills just as much as actual lack of language ability. And then finally, lack of cultural fit is a major factor that a lot of employers in particular talk about. So today I'm going to be telling you about one study that I have undertaken recently in the last couple of years, where I actually went and spoke with employers, so human resource managers and hiring managers. And lack of soft skills or organizational fit was certainly an area that a lot of employers brought up as being something that holds newcomers back. Okay, so in 2015, these challenges and struggles that immigrants face are not new. These are well documented and well known for the last several decades. And so the Government of Canada has been tweaking the immigration system regularly to try and improve outcomes. And in 2015, the Government of Canada introduced Express Entry. Express Entry moved Canada's immigration system from a first-in-line system, so first come, first serve, to what they called a best-in-line system. So basically, it's an expression of interest, and then the government actually invites those who are deemed to be the top of those who have expressed interest to apply. So it's an invitation-based system. So this kind of alters Canada's immigration system from a supply-based system to a demand-based system. That was at least the way it was designed initially. And so in Express Entry, prospective immigrants submit an online profile, which is an expression of interest to immigrate to Canada, and they have to submit a number of documents to back up their expression of interest. And candidates who meet the eligibility requirements for one of the major programs, such as the Federal Skilled Workers Program or the Canadian Experience class, and I'll talk a little bit about what each of those classes are in a moment, are actually entered into a pool. Now, based on a comprehensive ranking system, which kind of ranks various human capital attributes of the applicant, candidates are awarded points. So essentially, we have had a points-based system for many decades, since 1967. But Express Entry has simply taken that points-based system and turned it on its head a little bit so that it is the government that actually invites those who have the required number of points to fully apply. And those with the highest scores are actually invited to put in a full application. So I want to talk a little bit about the comprehensive ranking system that all Express Entry applicants have to go through. So as I said, since 1967, Canada has had a points-based immigration system for economic immigrants. And factors like education, language ability, and work experience have always been part of that point system. And so not surprisingly, those are the same factors that are also part of Express Entry. But in addition to that, there are a number of other elements of points that have been added into the Express Entry system. So the spouse's characteristics, if an applicant is married, is also considered, not as heavily, but it is also considered. And as you can see, age is seen as being a very important factor with a real focus on younger applicants. And then other factors such as having Canadian experience prior to immigration, having a post-secondary degree from Canada at the time of application, these factors are also weighted very heavily. So the emphasis really is now on younger applicants and those who have already either worked in Canada on a temporary work visa and or completed education in Canada. So that has really been a shift that has come with Express Entry. So Express Entry has tried to address some of the challenges by adding a number of elements to the point system. So in the past, credentials acquired abroad were not required to be assessed. They were taken at face value. And as I mentioned in an earlier slide, the devaluation of those foreign credentials was deemed to be a very big part of the reason why immigrants face disadvantage in the labor market. So the government of Canada has now instituted a mandatory educational credential assessment for foreign education. So if you have completed educational, post-secondary education abroad, that education has to be evaluated by a third-party organization, and there are about 5 major organizations that are the official kind of ECA providers, and essentially stamped as being equivalent to Canadian. And as I mentioned, there are extra points for post-secondary education completed in Canada and a real emphasis on pre-landing Canadian work experience. Mandatory language testing is also an important element of Express Entry. I mean, language testing has been part of Canada's point system for a long time, but the actual cutoff and the requirements within those tests have actually been made more stringent and more strict. And as I mentioned, there's been a real preference put for younger applicants. And so what we actually find when we look at the data, at least up to 2019, is that these changes have really shifted the profile of newcomers who are being invited to come to Canada. So what we actually find is that half of those who were invited to apply in 2019 were already living in Canada, either as international students or as temporary foreign workers. And so this is a major, major shift in the way that Canada's immigration system is constructed. We've really shifted, first of all, from a supply-based kind of design to a demand-based design. And second of all, from a one-step immigration system where the majority of people, came straight from abroad, to a two-step system where the norm is actually that people come here to study or work on a temporary basis before becoming permanent residents. As I also mentioned, the age profile of newcomers has changed significantly. So with express entry, the focus is really to bring in folks in their 20s. And so more than half of those who were invited to apply in 2019 were in their 20s. And if you are over about 34, there's very, very little chance of being invited to apply. So it's really meant to be a system where it's for young people who preferably already have experience in Canada. So when express entry was first introduced, the role of employers in selecting who was invited was really promoted as being an important part of the system. So it was kind of deemed to be a central role where employers would help make the decision of who gets to actually come into Canada. Very quickly, though, what was realized is that employers were not inviting or were not selecting applicants. They were not really participating in this system the way that policymakers had hoped they would. And so the points that actually one gets for having an arranged employment went from 600, which would have put you over the edge, to basically 50. So although it is still deemed to be a demand-based immigration system, we actually find that most people don't come with a prearranged job. So they have Canadian work experience, they have Canadian education often, but they don't always come with an arranged job. Okay, so with these changes, the question really is, has it really improved the way that immigrants perform in the labor market? So far, because express entry was introduced in 2015 and really only got going in 2016 because in 2015 there was still a huge backlog of previous applicants who were making it their way through the old system. 2016 was really the year where express entry took off. And then, of course, as of end of 2019, beginning of 2020, the pandemic hit. So we don't have a lot of data yet, data points on how express entry has influenced the labor market integration of immigrants, but we do have some descriptive data. And so what we actually find is that when we look at unemployment rates, so this sort of bottom line refers to those who are born in Canada, and the recent immigrant arrivals are the green line, and the very recent, those who've only been here for 5 years, is the dotted line. And what we actually find is that there seems to be some descriptive evidence that perhaps the unemployment rate of brand newcomers is getting a little bit better. Okay? Not very conclusive yet in terms of the data, but it seems that perhaps it's getting a little bit better. Similarly, when we look at wages of newcomers relative to Canadian-born, we find that since the introduction of express entry, there seems to be a slight uptick in wages of newcomers. And again, not particularly convincing because we don't have that many data points yet, but this is something that I'm actually researching right now, looking at whether the introduction of express entry has in fact improved labor market outcomes. And so, although not very conclusive, although not particularly convincing quite yet, it does seem that express entry and the changes that came with express entry have perhaps improved immigrant employment outcomes to some degree. So what do we know so far? We know that pre-landing Canadian work experience, so this two-step migration that I mentioned, we know that this is very, very beneficial for newcomers. So immigrants who already worked in Canada before becoming permanent residents do better. They do better. And this is not surprising, given that they basically already have a period of adjustment before they become permanent residents. And so all of the culture shock and the network building that goes along with the first few years in Canada, they already have gone through that while they're temporary residents. And what the evidence has actually shown here is that those who come as temporary foreign workers in high-wage jobs, so jobs that pay well, executive positions, highly specialized positions, those folks, once they transition to permanent resident status, they do very well. They basically face very few barriers in the Canadian labor market. That's not surprising at all. But a lot of temporary foreign workers, of course, are not working in those high-level jobs. And so many of those folks don't even have an avenue to become permanent residents, first of all. And those who do don't always benefit from it. So although the emphasis on pre-landing experience does improve labor market outcomes, it's not, something that fixes all of the problems. It really requires temporary foreign workers who already have quite good jobs, well-paid jobs before they become permanent residents. And then secondly, some other research that I've been working on has looked specifically at the introduction of the mandatory educational credential assessment. And what we find from our research there is that the mandatory ECA requirement does actually help. So whether that's because newcomers are able to prove the quality and relevance of their foreign education, or whether it's because we basically select out those who have low quality credentials, right? They wouldn't get the same kind of stamp as those who, have relevant and high quality credentials. Whether it's because of selection or for signaling, we do find that mandatory ECA requirement seems to have a beneficial effect for newcomers. So these two shifts and changes in Canada's immigration system do seem to have had some positive impact. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit today about some recent research that I started working on actually before the pandemic. I want to emphasize that this isn't really kind of post-pandemic information, but nonetheless, a lot of the issues that were brought up continue to be relevant today. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I really focused on gathering data from employers in this particular study. So we conducted 43 semi-structured interviews with expert key informants in a variety of sectors in the Greater Toronto area. We included key informants within settlement service sectors and immigration consultants, as well as HR managers and other frontline managers who could tell us their experiences with hiring newcomers. So we do have, quite a range of different sectors that were included within our sample, and so we got a pretty fulsome picture of, the experiences of those who are actually there on the ground working with newcomers. So, from our key informants, we really got a lot of positive reviews of Express Entry. So settlement service provider, for example, felt that really what Express Entry does is that it favors those who are already privileged in many ways. So in the short term, because we're really focusing on those who have already gathered some Canadian work experience prior to migration, those folks have an easier time integrating. And so we actually find that within the settlement service sector, a lot of the the service providers felt that they're not getting as many clients that actually turn to them for help among the brand new economic immigrants as we did in previous years. So that's a positive thing in many ways, because a lot of people are savvy when it comes to actually finding work, making their way around the labor market, and understanding how to navigate that. So the other really beneficial aspect of express entry was the fact that it's not a first-in-line system. So in the past, one of the major disadvantages of our points-based immigration system was the backlog. So there was often years that people would have to wait after submitting their application to find out whether they would qualify. Whereas in express entry, because a draw is made from those who have expressed an interest, a draw is made every 2 weeks. And so people know pretty quickly if they have met the requirements to be invited. And so people are not endlessly waiting in line. And especially those who are coming through the Canadian experience class. So I'll tell you a little bit about the different classes of immigrants that fall within express entry. So as I mentioned already, there's a federal skilled workers program, which is kind of the traditional economic immigrants that we often think of. But in the last decade and a half, a couple of new important programs have been introduced and enlarged. And one of them is called the Canadian Experience Class. So the Canadian Experience Class essentially prioritizes those who have already gathered some experience in Canada, either as students or as workers. So oftentimes, the express entry draws have really focused on selecting Canadian Experience Class applicants. And then a third growing category of immigrants are provincial nominees. So each province has a designated number of nominees that they are given to be able to invite. And depending on kind of regional labor market needs, oftentimes those folks already are working in that province and get sponsored by their employer to get that provincial nominee in order to get an application through that. Okay, so when we spoke to the employers, what we actually found is that some actually found that the newcomers that they had encountered over the past few years really did have the kinds of technical skills that they were looking for. So when we asked the employer interviewees, do you find that newcomers do kind of fulfill your labor market needs? We did have several people who really spoke about the kinds of technical qualifications that they were able to find through newcomers. And that was an important aspect of labor shortage for a lot of these employers. That being said, there were also a number of limitations that our key informants and our employers interviewees discussed. So what we actually heard a lot was the need for lower skilled workers, quote unquote lower skilled workers. So what we actually heard from employers was that they have huge labor shortages among skilled trades, of course, but also among lower, quote unquote lower skilled, those who don't need to have a university degree to come to work in the field, among those folks. And that was across sectors, from the service sector to the manufacturing sector to the healthcare sector. And so other research has shown that only half of the growth in university educated workers really end up taking jobs in fields or in occupations that require a university degree. So Canada's university educated workers has been growing significantly. So we have a lot of young people going to university, as we know, and yet many of them end up being underemployed once they graduate. And so within this context, new immigrants, face significant difficulty because they often find that even though they come as skilled workers, they have to take what we call survival jobs that are not matched to their skills and qualifications, and instead are in lower skilled sectors. And some of this has to do with the fact that their credentials are not recognized, but some of it is actually related to the fact that there is demand for people to work in those lower skilled sectors. So those low skilled workers are very much in demand, and that's an area that is still not a focus at all within Express Entry. So Canada's immigration system, economic immigration system in particular, still focuses on high skilled, university educated workers. And then secondly, the federal skilled trade program, which is a very tiny stream within our economic immigration system, is basically not enough, right? Some of the most passionate interviewees that I spoke to were those who were looking for pipe fitters and other, really skilled folks like machine operators and engineering technicians, and had huge skill shortages in their industry, but were not necessarily able to fill those positions. Okay, so when we actually asked about some of the other limitations, a lot of employers spoke about, some employees did talk about the benefits of the technical skills that were coming in, but in addition to that, coupled with that, a lot of them also talked about the soft skills that were actually missing. So although the technical skills were there, things like communication skills, language skills, understanding Canadian norms, fitting into the workplace, these kinds of factors were still seen as a big concern among newcomers. So these are things that are not actually measured or evaluated within our immigration system, and with good reason, right? It's often difficult to quantify and put your finger on some of these more soft skill factors. So, we had a manager in the service sector that said they lacked soft skills. And their experiences basically were that, the behavior of the newcomers, although technically good, didn't quite fit in. And I think we have to also be careful here because, there's an element of what is sort of the perception of the employer versus what is the perception of the newcomer. So in my interviews with HR managers and hiring managers, I was actually surprised how open they were with this feeling that a lot of the newcomers just didn't fit in. Despite having the technical skills and the qualifications, they just didn't fit in. I sometimes felt a little bit hesitant about that because, intercultural competence goes both ways, right? So a lot of those folks certainly didn't have a lot of experience working with newcomers or hiring newcomers. And so they also lacked intercultural competence in how you actually interact with people who are not necessarily of the same cultural background as themselves. But they didn't always have the insight to know that their own lack of intercultural competence could also be an issue there. So that was quite interesting. So as I said, it's not surprising that Canada's economic immigration system focuses so much on, official credentials and experience. Those are things that are easy to quantify, they're easy to measure, and they're easy to evaluate. There's a real challenge in trying to actually measure and evaluate soft skills for immigrants, despite being a major issue that a lot of employers talked about. There's even a consistency in defining soft skills. There are some efforts out there to put together, definitions of what soft skills comprise, but there is no universal definition. And even if one were to really define what soft skills means, assessing it is quite difficult. So there are some research instruments that have been developed to try and measure people's soft skills, but these require lengthy, in-depth evaluation. So to have immigration applicants go through that kind of lengthy, in-depth evaluation is pretty difficult because it would require, interviews and actual, one-on-one conversations with applicants for long periods of time in order to measure soft skills. And then finally, as I kind of alluded to, soft skills can also be used to legitimize discrimination and xenophobia. So soft skills criteria, we know from other research, has been used to exclude marginalized groups in various contexts. And so, it's an easy kind of out for employers to be able to say, well, yeah, they have the technical skills, but the soft skills are missing. And so taking some responsibility on the employer side is also, I think, really important, rather than putting everything on immigrants to kind of solve their soft skills. So in summary, what we know from the early evidence on express entry is that it seems to be positive. Relative unemployment and earnings seems to be getting better. There's some evidence that the mandatory credential assessment helps. We know that pre-landing education and experience helps. But that being said, there are concerns that remain. So many newcomers still are underemployed, are still not able to find jobs in their field. Two-step migration does have positive results, but we know that this has also come at the cost of having an explosion of temporary migration. I mean, temporary migrants vastly outnumber permanent migrant immigrants in Canada today. And that brings with it exploitation, potential exploitation anyways. And the challenges for actually making sure that temporary foreign workers are treated appropriately and with respect in the workplace. And then finally, soft skills, which are a major concern for employers, are challenging. How do we actually incorporate these into the immigration system? And moreover, should we? I mean, I think that that's a really important question that's really still up in the air. So there are some things that perhaps the immigration system could do to improve. There have been small pilot programs out there to try and facilitate connections between applicants, immigration applicants, and employers, even before someone puts their foot in Canada. And so these kinds of systems that actually bring together employers and applicants before migration has actually happened could be expanded. And with it, pre-arrival services could be expanded significantly. So we do have some pre-arrival services that newcomers are offered, but oftentimes it's quite limited because people get invited to apply and very quickly do immigrate to Canada. And finally, if there is a way to actually expand the kinds of skill sets that we are prioritizing in express entry to include lower skilled migrant workers and lower skilled economic applicants, that would help to fill some of those job shortages. And I want to emphasize here that we've often characterized immigrant integration as really this two-way street where both the immigrant and Canadian society come together to really adjust and to mutual benefit. But in reality, it really operates as a one-way street where immigrants are generally expected to adjust and change and shift and acquire the technical as well as soft skills necessary to do well in the labor market. And I think that we need to provide more training and resources to employers, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, to improve intercultural competence and acknowledge and reduce implicit bias towards newcomers in order to really make it that two-way street rather than have it simply as rhetoric. So that's all I wanted to speak about today. Hopefully, I've given you some insight into the ways in which Canada's economic immigration system operates, and I'd be happy to take some questions. I know there were some comments throughout, and I wasn't able to kind of follow along, so I'm happy to address some of those.
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you for the discussion today. That was very great of you and very informative. And to emphasize to the audience today, this will be posted as a recording to our website, along with an audio transcript too. So for those that have speaker issues, like computer speaker issues to themselves as well, there will be a transcript included along with the recording. So let's get into the questions, like I said. And we received a lot. If we don't get to them all, they will be posted with the recording as well on our meeting place on the N4 website. So the first question that we have is that cultural fit could be seen as a type of racial bias. How do you unpack that within your research?
Yeah, this is a real challenge. I mean, this is, as I alluded to, it's a real challenge because when I speak to employers, when I speak to managers, especially those who are, born and raised in Canada themselves rather than immigrants, there's a real sense that, there are just these implicit pieces of information or these implicit strategies for how you get along with people and how you interact within a team, for example, that all newcomers should know. And yet, when you actually dig down a little bit deeper, the level of bias and, frankly, just discrimination that's raveled into that perception is huge. And so I find it a real challenge. I don't have an answer to that because, from the employer's perspective, from the hiring manager's perspective, from the HR professional's perspective, oftentimes they say, our clients expect a particular kind of behavior or a particular kind of interaction. We need that. That's mandatory. And yet we know that implicit bias is, definitely built into that system. So it's really building awareness from the employer side, from hiring managers, is very important. And also, the more critical mass we have of newcomers from different places within workplaces, I think that perception will hopefully change, right? We need intercultural competence on both sides, right? From the newcomer in the way they behave towards clients and coworkers, but also from the Canadian managers and coworkers towards newcomers. And so if we have more of a critical mass of folks who are, in their field, working in what they're actually trained in, maybe this will change. I'm hopeful, but I think that that's an area that we just don't have enough emphasis on right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Our next question, do you believe that our current system meets the needs of urban communities as well as rural communities?
So did you say urban communities versus?
Rural.
Say that again.
Versus rural communities.
Yeah. So when I speak to employers in more rural places, and it doesn't even have to be rural. Just really outside of the major immigrant centers, outside of the GTA and Ottawa to some extent, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. Those skill shortages are even more massive, right? So oftentimes we actually find that employers are absolutely looking for newcomers. They're trying to welcome them. And so, for example, in Atlantic Canada, we have the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, where they're really trying to bring in newcomers. But the infrastructure isn't there to welcome those people. And so we often have newcomers who will go to those communities and then quickly leave. So for those outside of the major immigrant centers, just recruiting immigrants isn't the challenge, it's retaining them as well. So it's even more crucial than ever to really have, those intercultural competence skills, as well as, just local settlement services be bolstered in those urban centers to try and not just recruit folks to go there for 2 years and then leave, but to actually stay. So yes, it is a very major challenge, and it's different because there's this strange tension between the employer saying, please come, we need you, and yet on the other hand, people feel that, they're not welcomed by the community sometimes, or they don't have the kinds of friends and family networks, etc. So, it is a massive challenge, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. And I've been informed that my internet might be a little bit choppy too, so I do apologize for the inconvenience. Given the sectors that face shortages and also look to hire those overseas, why does Canadian experience weigh so heavily for employers looking for permanent or looking to hire new permanent residents and newcomers?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like, I think that this is kind of ironic because we have this huge growth of temporary workers who are hired straight from abroad, clearly without Canadian experience. And, especially in sectors where there's, still gaps, we do have employers who are directly hiring mostly temporary foreign workers from abroad on temporary contracts. And yet, when a permanent resident applies for jobs, often this lack of Canadian experience is brought up as being something that, employers are desiring so strongly. So I think that we have to acknowledge that some of this requirement of Canadian experience is also implicit bias, that employers are able to use this language of Canadian experience to really kind of exclude those who they feel, don't fit in. And so it kind of goes along the same line as, cultural fit that we were talking about earlier. I think when we spoke to employers who hire temporary foreign workers from abroad, a lot of them talked about the kinds of traits that really motivate them to hire folks from abroad. And those traits are things like, being a good employee, and to some extent having some leverage over them because they're temporary foreign workers. And really, even if they're being paid market wage, the kinds of working conditions and the kinds of characteristics that they have, right? And I heard this actually from employers of obedience and actually not being late and not having absent days. Things like that are actually deemed to be very important. But once an immigrant is a permanent resident, that kind of leverage is gone. So I do think that has something to do with the reason why a lot of employers opt to hire temporary foreign workers straight from abroad, because they have these other factors that give the employer a position of power over the immigrant.
Thank you. And I believe we have enough time for one more question. So the express entry seems to favor the young and the talented, which makes sense from a purely economic perspective. But I assume the old system of non-express entry still continues. Is this correct?
So essentially, all economic immigration in Canada, almost all, is now through express entry. So of course, we still have our family reunification class and our humanitarian immigration, but there are a very small number of provincial nominees who don't go through express entry. But I'm going to say that almost all economic immigrants, those who are federal skilled workers, those who are most provincial nominees and Canadian experience class now go through express entry. So it's kind of the system at this point.
Thank you. And thank you very much. And just with the time, we're going to wrap it up now. But I do want to say thank you, Rupa, for your presentation today and being available for that. And thank you so much to you, the audience, for joining us today and accommodating to our technical issues throughout, but thank you. You're welcome to join us again for any of our upcoming events too, including on August 11th and on August 25th. And following today's session, you will be invited to complete a survey to share your feedback with N4. These surveys will help us continuously improve and seek out new webinar content and opportunities that are responsive to the topics that you're interested in. We kindly ask that you follow the link to complete this brief survey. And if you missed any part of today's presentation, as well as the transcript, it will be posted onto the N4 platform within the next week or so. Dr. Banerjee will also be available to answer questions related to the webinar for up to 10 days following the webinar in the meeting place on the N4 platform. So we will be sure to reach out to Rupa once we have the recording posted and the questions as well. We'll be sharing relevant resources that Rupa was kindly enough to, along with when the recording is posted. So if you have not, please sign up to newcomernavigation.ca to access our many resources, our webinars, and our meeting place on the N4 platform. And before we sign off, are there any final words that you'd like to say, Rupa?
I think I got you there, Andrew. It's so the technical issues are making the audio pretty glitchy, but I think you said whether I have any last words.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended, and also I'm happy to, as Andrew said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there were other questions within the chat, the question and answer field that I wasn't able to get to. I'm happy to, answer emails even. I think the bottom line is that we have a system that, does have benefits. It does work on average, but it still has a lot of gaps and a lot of holes, and there are cracks in the system which can definitely be worked on. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. We'll see you online again at a future N4 event. Take care.